Hey, welcome back to the Rejuvenate podcast. I'm your host, Elwin Robinson, creator of Genetic Insights, the Rejuvenate Blueprint, and a bunch of other stuff. And I'm excited today to be joined by longevity expert, Dr. Miriam Mikitsky of Health Miro. She is a standard kind of classical medicine doctor. She's a functional medicine doctor. She's got certifications in all kinds of other interesting things, including a very prolific knowledge of Eastern medicine. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about longevity, anti-aging, and life extension. Welcome, Dr. Mikitsky, or Dr. Miriam, as we usually call you.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you for having me, and it's always a pleasure to be here.
And so, you recently started a clinic that's focused more on longevity, which is very exciting. And I know you've been focused on it. Just recently, we were talking about how you went to like a seminar over in America, or like an expo or something, a week's events, learning all about longevity. So today we're going to cover, what causes accelerated aging and what testing that we can do to assess our rate of aging and if we are actually older than our chronological years or younger than our chronological years and stuff. So that's very exciting. But to start with, let's talk about why the focus on longevity. Why have you decided to set up a new, clinic focus mainly on that? Why has it become your passion?
Yeah, so as some of you might know, I'm a conventional GP, and I did train in functional medicine, but sort of my introduction, I would say, into more holistic practices really began with my interest in East Asia. So before I studied medicine, I studied Mandarin Chinese and sort of East Asian cultures, and I spent quite a lot of time in China, and then also further in Japan and Korea. And I was actually really fascinated with how people age in that part of the world. And I remember sort of even telling my parents when I was over there, like, you just see these elderly people who are squatting, like they have their exercises in the park, they're doing qigong, they're like vendors that seem like they must be in their 80s, and they just seem to be in such good health compared to what I would see in the US and in Eastern Europe. Compare, and it's a bit biased, of course, like, for example, looking at like nursing homes in the United States. And so I just was fascinated by how, the societies in East Asia seem to age better and just be functional at a later age. And that sort of, in a way, is, what we're looking at when we think about health span. And, my practice
Sorry,
is always,
what's the distinction there with health span? Because the reason I don't use longevity usually is because living longer is not necessarily more appealing, right? If, as you say, I used to work at also a retirement home for a couple of years, and they were like the healthiest people. I think the average age was 90, and they didn't require full-time nursing care, but it's not aspirational. Like, the life kind of was a struggle. And so I think what we're talking about, right, is how to be healthier and youthful for longer. That's really the key of what you focus on too, right?
exactly. I mean, I think longevity has become a bit of a buzzword now, but I completely agree that it's a more health span, meaning the portion of a person's life in which they're in good health, free from chronic disease and from significant disabilities, rather than just the total amount of years that people are living. And I always used to, I would get annoyed actually, because you do hear about, when our community, the functional community, kind of criticizes the conventional medical sphere, the first thing you always hear is, well, people are living longer, and that's something to celebrate. And you're like, well, people are living longer, but how many people are being sort of artificially kind of kept alive and not really, not really enjoying those years, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, and as I said, you recently went to, a seminar on the subject of longevity. I mean, I'm quite plugged into this community as well, but I know you often come to me with stuff I haven't heard of. So tell me, what do you think? What are the biggest trends at the moment in the longevity community? What are you seeing? What's maybe up and coming stuff that most of us aren't aware of yet?
Yeah, so I actually went to the A4M, so the American Academy for the Advancement of Medicine, their longevity fest that they have every year in Las Vegas, and it and so get to hear a little bit about the latest research, and yeah, to be honest, it was a bit. A lot of it was sort of research that showed some of, like, for example, there was a lot of research about meditation and how important it is. So really going back to the basics. There was also just more information about testing, things like glycanage and TruAge, which we'll speak about. But I would say also, I think it's just such a full-on event. You probably had more than, I would say probably like 40 lectures a day. So it's something that I plan to like look a bit more into. But there was a mix of like which, medicines that are quite well known in the longevity community, like rapamycin, even sort of things like methylene blue and using it compounded, that I wasn't aware of. So it was really kind of, for me, also, I think many of the speakers were aware that this field is becoming a bit of a trendy field. And so I do feel like they were trying to push some of the basics. I would say some of the things though that really stood out were talks on bone health. And, for example, they were talking about like absorbability of proteins, and actually research says that actually like egg and soy were supposed to be one of the easily digested proteins. And so there was a bit of a debate about what kind of, for the elderly, what sort of protein should you be suggesting to really help promote bone health and muscle health. That was a little bit surprising to me. Yeah, I could go on and on. There were lots of interesting things, actually.
Probably fairly mainstream. This is always the challenge, isn't it? It's picking between the research that's valid versus the research which is sponsored by industry. And of course, that's on all sides, right? That's always a challenge. You mentioned there that it's become trendy longevity. Why do you think that's the case? I mean, there's a case that will always be interested. I mean, back to the ancient alchemists, even like that the key was like to try and live as long as possible. Isaac Newton was an alchemist, the father of science. So it's hardly a new trend in that sense, right? But by trendy, I think you mean it's becoming more and more popular, right? More and more people are interested in this and pursuing it. Where do you think that comes from?
I mean, a mix of things. I know that, in general, people are, having like working longer and then retiring later and then wanting to have a more meaningful life when they're older, and they don't want to necessarily feel like they've worked and then they're chronically ill and then have to spend the last years of their life in poor health. So I think there is some kind of more philosophical reasons as to like people wanting to just be around longer, and have a more meaningful life. I feel like also some people are it's a bit of a fear response as well, fear of dying, fear of getting kind of age-related diseases such as cancer. And I would say that a lot of what's called longevity, we're in a way doing in functional integrative medicine. We're looking at hormone optimization. And I have to say, like, I think it's a bold statement, but like this generation, I would say, like, I do see people in their 70s who look so much younger and so much healthier. And I just think that's unheard of when I think of like my grandparents' generation. And you're like, well, there clearly wasn't that understanding of how you can use hormones for anti-aging purposes. And, so many things, but those are sort of a few that I think, was spurring the interest.
Yeah, I think, you're talking about that's the baby boomer generation that you're talking about there, right? And I think one of the hallmarks of them was like more of a fear of death and also like a veneration of youth and youthfulness, right? And I think that's still something to this day. I mean, I guess that's always been the case to some degree. But in a lot of cultures, like those Asian cultures that you just mentioned, there was a kind of, even in, I grew up in Holland the first few years of my life, and there's like a different way that you refer to someone if they were older than you or not. If they were a peer, you'd say yeah, and if they were someone who's older, then they'd be considered more worthy of respect, and you'd say ooh. So that was like a different way. So that, like, it was even built into the language that someone older was inherently worthy of more respect from you. And I think probably our cultures, like US, UK, those kind of Anglo cultures, have less of that than almost any culture ever, right? Like, we really feel like youthfulness is superior, and of course in some ways it is, but it's very much that's the focus. Do you agree with that?
I agree, and I also think there's actually more research pointing out that, like, okay, if you look younger, to be in better shape, better presented, which of course I think you're more able to present yourself better if you feel healthier, you can be more successful, and so I think there's a little bit of that culture as well, and I'd say a bit of the kind of aesthetic relation. And I know that's very prevalent also in East Asia, like in countries like Korea, where you have to you have to basically on every job application you have to put a photo of yourself, and so just your outward appearance is very important. And you also, I think, if you portray yourself as being as someone who could live longer because you look healthy, you're probably also more attractive even for the job market from that perspective.
So that may be a bit negative as well. We could say that's maybe because the culture is becoming a bit more narcissistic throughout the world, right? And appearance is becoming more and more important. But despite all that negative stuff, I do think the focus on longevity is very good because fundamentally, if it, as you say, if it's optimizing people's hormones, if it's optimizing their mitochondrial function, if it's optimizing their levels of neurotransmitters, et cetera, all that kind of stuff, then people are going to feel better. They're going to have more mental clarity. They're going to make better decisions. And they're going to be better people. So overall, I'm a big fan of the movement. I think whatever motivates people to do it doesn't matter. If they get themselves in a more optimal state, that's just a good thing for themselves and everyone around them.
I agree. I mean, and kind of, the cohort of people that I often work with who struggle with brain fog and chronic fatigue, or, declining memory, sort of, you often hear just like how prolific, their careers were, or how good they felt, before something. And you just think like, if people are feeling like, what are we missing in terms of like innovation in the world? Because people are stuck in, in a fog, or not energetic, and just feel like they're just kind of passing through day to day, not really living a productive health span. So yeah, I think overall it's a very good movement. I mean, perhaps one of the other reasons, just there's a lot of business in it too. And I think it's people who are wanting to prevent and live better are also more likely to invest in themselves, as opposed to maybe somebody who maybe views themselves as a sick person first. So that could be another thing.
True. I was thinking, to give the baby boomers credit for a second, I think they had higher ambitions for themselves, right? Not to settle, not to kind of just accept that, you fall apart over time and stuff like that. And again, I would say that's a good thing. Okay, so let's get into the main bulk of this episode, which is the teaching stuff. Hopefully, a lot of which I'm not going to be aware of. So this is going to be good for me as well. I'm going to be educated. So based on, and we were planning this episode a couple of days ago, and we looked at one of my previous episodes on life extension, and I think that was a year or two ago now. I just shared everything that I was aware of at the time as to like the theory as to what causes accelerated aging. But I know that you have your own list for this and that it's up to date. So I'm excited to hear about it. Yeah, so tell us, what causes accelerated aging or premature aging, or I guess maybe even aging full stop, right? What are our enemies that we're then going to learn how to overcome?
Yeah, and I think broadly, to be fair, the categories might be similar, but I think we just know we can put more information in each category. So we think of, first of all, genetic factors and epigenetic factors. So for example, even like telomere shortening, which telomeres are sort of like these protective caps on your chromosomes, and they kind of get eroded, and as they erode, that causes more aging. But you can have some genetic predispositions that can lead to, for example, abnormally, rapid shortening of these telomeres. And also, there are certain genetic SNPs that can just predispose to higher inflammatory even how you handle stress, poor cellular repair. So I would say genetics do play a big role, but I think the more you know about your genetics, the more you can then, alter your epigenetics and pick which lifestyle factors to adhere to in order to kind of overcome that.
Yeah, mitigates. That's what we're allowed to say with our genetic company. We can't say we can help you. We can't diagnose or prevent anything, but we can help you to mitigate the risk, which is true. We can help to minimize the risk when you do have those genetic factors.
No, exactly. And even, even on in genetic insights, when we look at, you're just amazed just even reading those reports there that, something like how, like, yeah, how you handle stress, or I'm just trying to think of kind of one you'd never think about, but that there are so many SNPs that they'll just give you a snapshot of to say that you're more likely to be a worrier because you have this, and it's just amazing how actually a lot of that is very accurate when you then apply it to your own life.
Yes. Yeah. 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 Very accurate.
And then of course, with epigenetic changes, we know that, for example, DNA methylation, which controls a lot of of how, which genetic SNPs are active or inactive, those can be turned on and off from environmental, dietary, lifestyle factors, and some of your protective genes that prevent against aging can be turned off because of a harmful lifestyle. So that, I would say, that's broadly more the genetics, epigenetics, in a nutshell. Then I think, I think when, given that it's the new year, we're always thinking about like diet and exercise as things that, kind of lack of exercise and poor diet accelerating aging. I would put sort of chronic stress above that, and say that cortisol, even though it's a life-saving hormone, is very damaging and does accelerate aging, damaging tissues, impairing the immune system. And so we have to kind of always think about its impact on our life. And I would say, especially for the people I see who tend to know a lot about food and exercise, often it's that stress element that I think is really playing a big role in their aging. Even, for example, things like gray hair in younger individuals, you're like, that is actually a sign of oxidative stress. And and so that's one thing. And I would say not just a stress from the mental psychosocial point of view, but also stress from pathogens, from pollutants, and also like your circadian rhythm dysregulation.
On the subject of stress, that's an interesting one, because I've been teaching this for a good 15 years. I'm a big believer in this, that it's a major root cause. I think I used to say it's the number one root cause, although I've expanded that a bit. Obviously, there are some people that say stress is good. Wim Hof method springs to mind, for instance, like those kind of stresses. And there's this concept of hormesis. I had a guest on a little while ago called Jay Feldman, who debunked that in his mind. He said there's no such thing as hormesis, that there may be things there may be things beneficial about whatever, cold water or exercise or whatever, but it's not the stress itself that's beneficial. It's the other things about it, which I thought was an interesting perspective. I think the mainstream medical perspective is probably that stress is fine unless it's extreme, right? Unless it's like Cushing's or Addison's, right? But otherwise it's fine. So what's where do you fall on that? And can you also, for people who are maybe a bit on the fence, or who are on, maybe who don't believe in the importance of stress as much as you do, could you explain a bit about why chronically elevated levels of cortisol and adrenaline are such a problem?
No, of course. I mean, going just back to Wim Hof and these kind of, I would say, like shock methods that kind of increase your cortisol. I mean, my understanding was always that it's the ability that then your resilience to kind of bounce back, from that. So you're exposed to cold, you're then able to activate your vagus nerve, change the way you're breathing, and then actually get into a more relaxed state. But actually the cold, or the uncomfortable sensation is actually the stressor. Then you have to learn how to deal with it. And I think when I think stress, it's not about eliminating stress from your life. It's about how to, face it with, and then not have it continuously wreak havoc. Because I agree, like, I don't think the solution is that we need to always, that we need to just, be in a cave, like far from any kind of factors. Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay, so occasional stress.
Yeah.
So occasional stress can be good because, as you said, your body adapts to it and maybe becomes stronger, like the stress of exercise. But what's wrong? What is actually bad about having chronically high stress levels? Let's put it that way.
So we know that cortisol is actually a hormone that essentially what you're trying to do is get your blood sugar up, divert energy into into like a danger response so that you can use energy to run away from danger, but it's not actually building, it's more destroying. And so, for example, if you're about to be hit by a bus, well, that surge in cortisol is beneficial because it's almost like, your body says, okay, now is not the time to rest, digest, we just divert blood away to your, to your skeletal muscle and you run away. Versus, but if that happens and then the stressor is gone, you're able to quickly get back down into the more parasympathetic state, and that cortisol level drops, and and the adrenaline gets metabolized, and you're back to that that more calm state. But in today's society, what then happens is that high cortisol causes muscle destruction, gut barrier, destruction is maybe the wrong word, but it can cause leakiness in the gut. I would say gut permeability issues. It drives your blood sugar up, and because we're not sort of getting back into that state of more parasympathetic dominant, you're actually just creating a lot of inflammation through that process.
When I ask people the question, where do you get your health news? A lot of people are like, oh, I don't know. Or they name, like, they have to go to a lot of different places. And I was actually in the same boat, which is why I decided, let's create a health news show. So I'm excited to announce that starting Saturday, the 25th of January, we're going to be doing weekly live news shows at 3 p.m. US Eastern Standard Time, 8 p.m. UK time. We'll be talking about the latest changes in regulations, which is very exciting because I think 2025, there's going to be some big and hopefully positive shifts in the maybe 100-year trajectory we've had of regulations kind of creating chronic illnesses. We're going to talk about the biggest breakthroughs in scientific discoveries in the area of health, longevity, rejuvenation. And we'll be doing a kind of cultural section as well, where we talk about some of the most interesting, the wackiest, the most fun, the most viral trends in the health world as well. So to check all of that out, check out my new health news show, Elwin Robinson's health news show, every Saturday live on YouTube. And if you want to make sure you get notifications for that, go to my website, feelyounger.net. Just subscribe there, and I do weekly emails once a week, and in my weekly email, I'll send you a reminder and send you a link to the next episode. Hopefully, I will see you there.
So just for clarity, so this is mainly derived from a paper, quite a well-known paper about the hallmarks of aging. So the first one would be genomic instability. So basically, the accumulation of DNA damage and mutations, which can then impair how the cell works. And ways in which that could happen can be through oxidative stress, environmental factors like radiation or exposure to certain chemicals, also some genetic defects in how the DNA is replicated, and we know that if this goes wrong, then and you don't have an efficient DNA repair mechanism, then this can basically exacerbate the DNA damage, and then that can promote age-related diseases such as cancers, things like Alzheimer's disease, to name a few.
So, yeah, this is a really big deal, right? I think, I've seen people say this is the primary cause of aging, because my understanding is like, so the cells are not immortal, right? There's like a turnover of them. And then the genes are like reading the RNA, is there a way around to then know what cells to create? And as there's damage, whether it's, as you say, all those different factors you said. So in my case, for instance, I have high levels of toxic lead, so that could potentially cause damage, or mercury or something like that, right? And then it means that replication of that cell is not correct. And if that happens, for instance, with immune cells, then that could cause almost, I've talked about that in a different episode, almost every one of the 10 most common reasons that people die can be related to immune system dysfunction, right? Which can go back to that DNA replication that you just said. So, yeah.
No, exactly. I mean, immunity, infection, immunity, autoimmune diseases, so many things. And of course, immunity just in terms of how you defend yourself against environmental factors. So I think it's the most important one. And I mean, that kind of goes a little bit into the second one of telomere attrition, which in a way can make the, if you have shorter telomeres, it can make the genome more unstable, as to say.
Oh, interesting. And so can you define to people what telomere means and what attrition means?
Yeah, telomere, I mean, I think the easiest way to define it would be there are these like protective caps on the ends of chromosomes. And when the cell divides, a tiny microscopic piece of that, mini microscopic piece, kind of gets destroyed. And so the telomeres shorten with each cell division. And we know that very short telomeres actually trigger cell death, cell senescence, and we think that this is actually one of the primary causes of aging, and also from a macro level, things like certain cardiovascular disorders, and basically cells also being more susceptible to oxidative stress and then destruction.
Interesting. And I think when we look at my results, we're going to look at my how old are my actually results at the end of this episode. So stay tuned for that. So yeah, I think when we look at those, my telomeres were not great. I think they were shorter than they should be for my age. So that's good to know. That's not a good thing. I think I started taking something to try and lengthen them. So when I retest, we'll see if that worked. In the next episode we'll do with Dr. Miriam, we will focus more on the solutions. In this episode, we're going to focus really on the causes and then the testing, because I think that is super, super important. Because, of course, one size fits all general recommendations. There are a dime a dozen out there. Everyone's got them. What we're going to teach you is how to actually personalize them to you, which is way more important. Okay, so that's number 1 and 2. What's number 3, Dr. Miriam?
3 is for epigenetic alterations. So also, changes in DNA methylation, and in a way, these all do interrelate. For example, your epigenetics can affect like how also which genes are expressed, which histones are modified, and also basically changes overall in the DNA methylation and structure of the DNA can lead to dysregulation in how the genes are expressed, and this then disrupts normal cellular function and promotes aging. And we think that if this doesn't work how it should, it can also lead to impaired stem cell function and impaired tissue regeneration, because we know that you do damage cells and tissues every day, but it's that repair mechanism that's so important, and that can have some epigenetic basis.
Excellent. And so the distinction with number one is more that there's errors in the replication, which, as we said, keeps going on with cells. Whereas with this one, it's certain things being turned off and certain things being on, which kind of puts things in a different direction, like different your body's going down a different pathway than if it was turned off and on. That's the distinction, right?
Exactly. The first one is more that the actual mechanisms completely go awry and you accumulate damage, whereas the epigenetic alterations, the genetic SNP works well, but it could be telling you to do the wrong thing, basically. It's like
That makes sense. Awesome. Okay. And what's next?
So the loss of proteostasis, which is basically means the loss of protein homeostasis, and we know that proteostasis kind of ensures that proteins are being folded properly, and then they are fulfilling their function, and that they're being degraded. And we know that aging can disrupt that process. So you basically, accumulate damaged, misfolded proteins.
And why is that a problem? Is that proteins within the DNA, or are we talking about muscle tissue? What context are we talking about here?
We're talking about, I'd say, even more of a macro level, like we know that impaired proteostasis can directly contribute to like the tau proteins that accumulate when someone has Alzheimer's disease, or these kind of accumulation of proteins that can lead to the nerves being damaged in things like Parkinson's disease.
Okay, so accumulation can be one of the problems when they're not folded properly. Okay, that's interesting. All right, what's next?
So the next one is disabled macroautophagy, which a fancy word for macroautophagy just means a cellular process that removes the damaged organelles and proteins. Because, as you said, you're damaging your cells and your organelles on a daily basis, but you need to have an efficient way that removes them without causing a lot of inflammation around it. And we know that process of autophagy, how efficient that process is, declines as you get older. And you kind of then accumulate sort of debris as well that wasn't properly gotten rid of. And so we know that restoring this autophagy is linked to better cellular health, and then optimally to better health span.
So this is like cellular recycling. Is that a good way of looking at it?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, all right.
So Mm-hmm. I'll just add that actually, a lot of the interventions, which we'll probably go into in the next podcast, talk about autophagy and improving that. So it's just a good one to know.
Yes, absolutely. AMPK and fasting and all that kind of stuff. But we'll talk about the relative benefits of all that stuff next time. So that's great. Okay. What's next?
Next one, so again, it's called deregulated nutrient sensing, which again, a fancy word, basically say that certain pathways in the body, like AMPK, mTOR, even your like insulin, IGF-1 pathway, they can regulate how nutrients are sensed and metabolized, and then that those pathways can also go awry and lead to metabolic imbalances, reduced stress resistance, and aging. And we think actually that caloric restriction and then certain pharmaceuticals can target these pathways and then prevent these metabolic imbalances and improve our resistance to stress.
So nutrients, are you including hormones in that then? So is insulin resistance or leptin resistance in that category, or is that something different?
No, that would be included too as well.
Genetic Insights provides cutting-edge, affordable DNA testing, giving you access to over 500 health reports that can help you in 3 key ways. They may be able to resolve your existing health challenges even when nothing else has worked. Using simple lifestyle changes, their reports can help you reduce your risk of developing future health challenges that you may be genetically predisposed to. And they can help you feel more confident in your health by showing you where you are genetically strong. Unlike most other genetic health testing companies, Genetic Insights tests over 83 million different variations in your genes, guaranteeing 99.7% accuracy across all of their DNA reports. They cover almost every aspect of health, including digestive issues, cardiovascular health, weight loss, hormonal and blood sugar balance, as well as nutrient needs, allergies and intolerances, and so much more. Using their system is quick and easy, and reading the reports is simple. If you've done an Ancestry DNA test, you can simply download your raw DNA data, upload it to the Genetic Insights platform, and within a few hours you will have access to genetic reports which give you a risk score for each specific issue and scientifically validated recommendations based on your individual genetic profile. Everything in your reports are based on scientific studies, and there are citation links throughout every report. If you are serious about optimizing your health and wellness and feeling great, then getting access to your Genetic Insights reports may be the most important health investment you will ever make. In the reports, not only will you gain insights into how to overcome existing health challenges and avoid future issues, you'll also discover which types of dietary, lifestyle, and even supplement protocols are best for your unique genetics. To get your unique genetic health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and use code Rejuvenate to get 20% off today. That's geneticinsights.co using coupon code Rejuvenate to get 20% off today.
Yeah, because they're quite big in the longevity space, right? Insulin resistance has been big for a while, and leptin resistance, I see, especially the work of Dr. Jack Cruz, is becoming more and more prominent. I know a lot of our viewers are fans of Dr. Jack. Okay, interesting. Other than leptin and insulin, is there any other obvious examples that spring to mind?
So yeah, other ones, for example, include sirtuins and like FOXO transcription factors. So both actually pathways really regulate the cellular stress response, DNA repair, and metabolism. And like we know that, for example, certain nutrients, like for example things like NAD, can decrease sirtuins, which is why like NAD, for example, is quite a popular thing in the longevity community.
Okay, excellent. So what's next?
Mitochondrial dysfunction is the next one.
This is a big one that I've been learning about a lot recently. You and I have talked about a lot. So tell us about that one in a nutshell.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like just when this paper came out, a lot of it I think is very technical, kind of lab derived, but like mitochondrial dysfunction is something that has been talked about at least in the functional medicine community for a long time, about just how if we're looking at true health, we have to start at your smallest piece, so your cells and your organelles, and we know that mitochondria, of course, is where ATP is produced, and as we age, mitochondria produce less energy and generate more reactive oxygen species and free radicals. And then we know that this mitochondrial DNA damage contributes to also the cell not working so efficiently. We can implicate actually, dysfunctional mitochondria in quite a few, metabolic and degenerative diseases. And I would say that, in the cohort of patients I see, particularly in people who have chronic fatigue or long COVID, when we've done testing, we do see quite profound mitochondrial dysfunction, even in people who are young per se, like even 20s, 30s.
Yeah, I know there are some people in this space like Dr. Cruz, who I mentioned a few minutes ago, who believe that mitochondrial dysfunction is the number one root cause of the chronic disease epidemic. And I think he's had an influence on RFK Jr., who I've also heard say very similar stuff, that you felt like mitochondrial dysfunction was like a fundamental root cause of the health crisis that we're facing. So as you say, some people have been talking about it for quite a while, and very important. And I don't know, testing for it hasn't been available up until relatively recently, right? But it is these days. So maybe we'll touch upon that at the end of the episode when we talk more about testing the mitochondria. In the meantime, what's next on the list?
Cellular senescence, another important category.
So what's that? Let's assume people haven't heard of that.
So I guess the easiest way to define it would be that cells that are senescent, essentially, they stop dividing, but they remain metabolically active and actually can secrete a lot of pro-inflammatory factors. And we know that that's not ideal. So accumulating these cells can promote inflammation and disrupt tissue and organ function. And so this, again, a lot of therapies revolve around trying to clear these cells, so that senolytics, which is something you'll hear thrown around in the longevity sphere. And that's sort of what a lot of research looks into in terms of anti-aging.
I think when I first heard about this, someone described it as the cell danger response. like the cell in the context of a virus or a toxin or something kind of goes into a hibernation type mode where it's still utilizing energy, but it's not doing anything useful. Also heard it referred to as zombie cells. Is that the same thing? Am I?
No, no, exactly. And I think I've actually often told people like you don't want your life to be like a senescent cell, that you're sort of just there and you have all these things attacking, and then you're kind of just in almost this brain fog. Yeah, zombie state is a great way to describe it.
So the self-danger response, I think it was described as it's a defensive posture, right? It's like it closes its borders, and that means that nutrients are not getting in as they should, waste is not getting out as it should, and then the cell isn't functioning as it should. And I guess the cell is kind of battening down the hatches temporarily to protect itself, but actually what it's doing is making itself useless and stopping itself being recycled. So that was my understanding of it. And again, there are some people, I can't remember who this was, I would give them credit if I did, who believe that this is the root cause of most chronic disease. It's another one of those, right? That could be the key.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say that with the cell danger response, that it's almost like this fight or flight response, that your focus when you're resting should be growth and repair, and then it just quickly goes to protection, defense, and that is against things like toxins, chemicals, infections, actual physical trauma, low oxygen states. Similar to what you're saying.
Yes, I think I actually came across it first when I was researching mycotoxins and CIRS, chronic immune reactivity syndrome, something like that, right? That's the same, like it's a response to mycotoxins, but as you say, it could be a response to other toxins, viruses, various other things. Very interesting. Okay. I don't think there is a test for cellular senescence, right? At least last time I looked it up.
No, not really. So, I mean, I guess you could say that, when you're given sort of a chronological age, then some of the factors that affect cellular senescence are reflected in that, but no, not a direct one that we know of.
Not a what's the word, user test. I mean, obviously someone's testing in a lab somewhere, but not that you and I can just access and pay for. Okay, fair enough. What's next?
So I believe the next one is stem cell exhaustion.
Okay, tell us more about that.
Stem cells, basically lose their ability to differentiate over time, and also lose that ability to self-renew, and that impairs that impairs tissue repair and regeneration. And the thing is, again, they all kind of lump together because we know that things that like telomere shortening, accumulation of DNA damage, inflammation kind of contribute to that process.
Okay. And is it as simple as it sounds? Stem cell exhaustion? Well, not quite, maybe not that they're literally tired, but like, is it that you're running out of stem cells? Like you're getting through them too quickly? Or is there more to it than that?
Uh, Often also, not also, I think as they are, also my understanding is as they're dividing as well, that constant division also burns them out.
So it is literally as simple as being exhausted. Yeah, fair enough.
My understanding, at least, yeah.
And so that could be in response again to trauma and toxicity and stuff, right? Because they're trying to go and replace the cells that have been damaged, and they're not able to keep up with it. Is that the idea?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, awesome. What's next?
I believe also there is chronic inflammation.
So that's one that's probably talked about more than anything else, right? And we'll definitely talk about that more with testing. But tell us, why does that accelerate aging or cause premature aging? What mechanism does it do that by?
So we know that, again, inflammation kind of be divided. Like there is protective inflammation that stimulates your immune system. Acute inflammation leads to your CRP rising, but then generally your body's going into this mode to get rid of infection or get rid of something, but it's the kind of low grade persistent inflammation, or what's called inflammaging, that we associate with accelerating aging and age-related disease. And then again, things like cellular senescence, the immune system being dysregulated, as well as your gut bacteria and balance between good and bad gut bacteria that can influence this. And as your listeners know, we know that chronic inflammation is linked to all sorts of diseases like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, neurodegeneration.
And can you explain a little bit more? I mean, yes, they probably do know that, but what I think most people have heard that this is bad. I don't know how many of them understand why it's bad. Like, so what's actually happening in the case of inflammation that is bad when it's excessive?
So if we take, for example, like, cardiovascular disease, we know that the inflammation, can actually promote plaque buildup. It basically can, stimulate the immune system to do things where vessels don't relax, plaque builds up, and I guess,
Which can kill you. So that's a very direct, very direct answer. And the same with plaque building up in the brain, right? In the case of Alzheimer's.
Exactly. And I think maybe actually just to kind of touch more upon that, like if we look at, your lining of your blood vessels, so your endothelium, we know that that's really the part that regulates clotting, the tone, blood flow. And so we know that chronic inflammation, like through, pro-inflammatory cytokines like TNF-alpha, interleukin-6, that actually directly damages those endothelial cells. And then that, just like it is in the gut, for example, the endothelium also becomes leaky, and that's where, for example, like the small dense lipoproteins can actually get in, and then if that wall's damaged, they're more sticky, and so it just leads to this cascade of problems, and then on and on. So that's for example, like in the heart, and then you have similar effects in pretty much all other organs, but not quite that same physiology, but a similar process that small event leads to this cascade.
Okay, awesome. And I think there's one more on your list there.
Yes, I think, I had dysbiosis on there because I just don't want to, I think you just have to talk about the composition and diversity of the gut microbiota, because of, we're technically more bacterial cells than we are human cells. So you can't really talk about humans aging without the bacteria that influence that. And we know that, imbalances in the gut microbiome impair your digestion and how you absorb your nutrients. So many of the things that you need for your cells to function well requires, requires good gut absorption, and your immune system, you have your GALT and a big chunk of your immune system in the gut. So that would probably be the main hallmarks that I'm familiar with from this paper.
And is there anything I'll just touch on dysbiosis. Because Dr. AP, another person who we refer to often on this channel, he talked about this and how if you have too much of the wrong type of bacteria, they create a lot of toxins, especially endotoxin, which, as you said, if there's also intestinal permeability, will then get into the bloodstream and can cause all kinds of issues and definitely reduce lifespan. I think there's studies showing that. I was quite surprised when I was researching anti-aging compounds that actually work. A lot of stuff that is talked about, like, I don't know, resveratrol is considered not really genuine. I think NAD was on that list as well. But one of the things that was on the list that was considered that was effective was activated charcoal. And my understanding is just through that mechanism, it's absorbing a lot of those toxins, like endotoxins, stopping them from getting into the bloodstream, which will then, prevent that inflammatory cascade that you were just talking about. So, it's interesting how important dysbiosis is. And of course, it's not only Dr. Pete who's talked about that. It's some of the most ancient systems of health in the world, right, have like the Indian and Chinese have talked about how the digestive tract, especially the intestines, is often the root, like the starting point of a lot of different diseases, right?
I guess it's like with resveratrol, my understanding was, that they're trying to theorize why in the studies it didn't actually promote human longevity, and they thought it was actually poorly absorbed. So
Yeah, there's that pterostilbene or something, right, which is the more well-absorbed version of it. But I don't think that's proven to be effective either. Sorry, what we're talking about here, in case anyone doesn't know, is like a lot of things that work in cell cultures, like in a lab, basically don't work when you actually give them to real human beings. So, yeah, there's a lot of speculation as to why that is and if it can be overcome. Like, as Dr. Miriam just says, like maybe making a better absorbed version of it.
But it's interesting because I guess you can say, I know, as much as you try to control for things, like what's to say that the people that they studied them had good gut bacteria, and and also, I just find it interesting because I guess if we look at it going from cellular to community wide, you do see like places in the world where there's a lot of resveratrol in like grapes and things where they eat that often. That you see people who live longer. So I
think
don't know.
it goes doesn't it go back to the personalized thing again? Like you just mentioned the microbiome. Like there are certain organisms that benefit from having resveratrol, and so if you don't have those organisms, then you don't get the benefit. I think that might be one potential explanation. It could be as simple as that.
Yeah, true. Because it's yeah, it's an interesting process. I think that's why actually there's a lot of debate in the longevity community, because I think they're still trying to rely on the same study design that maybe doesn't take into account that you really can't have that we can't have like 100 human subjects that are going to have identical gut microbiomes. So it just brings up a point about how these studies are made.
It's very tricky. Yeah, I think study that has not been done yet, but should be done, is to take 100 people and don't do anything to them, and take another 100 people and apply this personalized approach to them, like we're doing, which is not giving 100 people any one compound, but giving 100 people each different bunch of compounds, and general interventions, and then seeing if the people who had the interventions do better than the ones who don't. But that's not the type of scientific study that they do, unfortunately. But I think that would be type that hopefully they will do soon. And that would be a lot more fruitful. So, as you said, that's someone else's list in a way, Dr. Miriam, though it's one that's commonly referred to. Is there anything you'd add to that list? Like I know lipid peroxides is one, for instance, that you often talk about when it comes to testing, but I think you have a more like generalized theory about that one, right?
So I would say that when we, for example, like hormone levels such as DHEA and T3, I think those can say a lot about your immune health and your metabolism. So we have to take into account like those hormones as well when we're talking about how fast is somebody aging.
Okay. Well, in fact, that brings us to our next section, right? And probably our biggest section today, which is testing. So the first episodes that you and I did together were going through a lot of different lab values and explaining to people what they mean, what's good, what's bad, what's optimal, the rest of it. And so I definitely recommend people check out those episodes. But, obviously we went through many, many lab values there. And I think there's like a dozen-ish or so key lab values that you were saying that you would recommend that anyone interested in longevity should test on at least, a reasonably regular-ish basis. So could you go through and tell us I don't know if it's exactly a dozen, but those top markers that you would say are most important to test if you are looking to optimize your longevity or reduce your premature aging, or however you want to put it?
Sure. So, well, because we spoke about inflammation, I think I like to test quite a lot of inflammatory markers. So one I really like to test is HSCRP. That's probably the most well-known one, but kind of a reflection of your interleukin-1 status. But
And interleukin-1, is that like a highly inflammatory constituent of the immune system? Is that?
Yeah, sorry, I meant interleukin-6, but yes, that's one of your kind of one of your cytokines that is kind of released as a trigger of the immune system and of the inflammatory process. But there are others, which is why you can't only rely on that as a sole marker of your chronic low level inflammation. Another one I like to test is ferritin. So we know that ferritin is also an acute phase reactant, so it rises, when there's as a response to being exposed to something that's threatening, so infection, toxin exposure.
So I think most people think of that as the storage of iron lab marker. So you're saying it's both, right? It's not one or the other.
Exactly. I mean, we think storing too much iron itself is inflammatory, but you'll often see that ferritin is high, and actually all the other markers for iron storage are not high. So it's clearly been, it's solely just an inflammatory marker there.
Okay. Interesting. And so if the ferritin is low, does that mean that the person isn't inflamed, or is it again just one thing like that is not necessarily reliable?
It's, again, you have to take it into context, because again, if someone isn't absorbing because their gut microbiome is not great, or they have leaky gut, then they may just not, then it wouldn't really accurately reflect your iron stores, and then it might be artificially low as well.
Okay, so very high probably means inflammation, but very low doesn't necessarily mean not inflammation.
Exactly. Then another one I like to test as well is fasting insulin, because that also plays a role in metabolic processes and so many of the other things that trigger cell aging. We talk about just blood sugar and insulin response. So
that's the best marker of all of them for insulin resistance. Is that right?
Yeah. I would say definitely. I would say
is there a better one?
that. Well, some people say like glycomark or HOMA-IR, but in a sense, it's always using fasting insulin and then like an algorithm with other, with other markers.
Sorry, I just meant as one marker, like fasting insulin. But yeah, the IR, that's just, isn't it just fasting insulin plus fasting glucose that
Yes,
IR?
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. It's based on fasting insulin, fasting blood glucose, but I don't. It's like multiple divided by something that I don't know off the top of my head. To be honest, like I like to just see the markers, and then I'm not a big fan of these like ratios, or home is just plugging in numbers at the end of the day. But I would say, especially just for like when we look at like diabetes risk, even in conventional medicine, we're still at that stage where we're looking at HbA1c and fasting blood sugar, postprandial blood sugar, and actually, the fasting insulin is something that shows dysregulation much earlier than, so you'll have dysregulated high fasting insulin before, many years before you'll have any problems with blood sugar.
Mm-hmm. But the A1C you said you like to test as well, right? To see if it is far advanced.
Exactly. Yeah. That again is a marker of glycation. We know that when things are being oxidized, glycated, that is not good, and so we want to minimize that. Yeah. Other things as well, like I like to check homocysteine. That gives us an insight to methylation, and it's also an inflammatory marker. GGT, which is great.
And sorry, just to go back. What is homocysteine? Cysteine's amino acid, right? So what is homocysteine? Can you explain a bit about how it's like a marker of inflammation and methylation?
Yeah. So so as you said, homocysteine. It contains cysteine, which is sulfur-containing amino acid, and it's basically a step down from. So if we look at just the cycle of methylation, it's kind of a byproduct after you metabolize methionine, which is another amino acid, and essentially you're always trying to go back to recycling that methionine. So basically, if you want to keep that homocysteine low, because that's a sign that you've kind of recycled back into methionine. and to cysteine, the other amino acid. So it's kind of a reflection of how well that cycle is working, and that whole cycle plays a role in how you activate certain enzymes, which kind of proteins you're creating. So has a big role in your neurotransmitter production. So it's very important.
So it tells you how a lot of other processes are doing by checking how one process is doing. And is there something innately bad about homocysteine, or is it just a marker to see how all those processes are doing?
So we know that. I mean, it's a tough question because we know that elevated homocysteine. The reason it's elevated is because you have troubles breaking the homocysteine down, and that can actually be secondary to a nutrient deficiency. So then we know that, okay, you might be deficient in certain B vitamins. There might be some genetic SNPs that affect how well you're able to, to break down the homocysteine. So I would say it's not inherently bad. It's kind of why that process doesn't. Well, it is inherently bad because we know that high homocysteine is linked to.
But only for that reason.
Sort of,
it's not like mercury where it just poisons everything it touches. It's
exactly. Yeah. I mean, you're always going to have homocysteine because you're always going to be kind of, you're going to be using that cycle. But yeah, it's so it's bad by association.
Okay. All right. Awesome. What's next?
So also, I like to look at a thyroid panel. So TSH, free T3. Also things like albumin.
Well, sorry, let's go back to thyroid. I know we've talked about this loads before, but just in the context of longevity for a second, what are we looking for? Like what are we checking in the thyroid panel in terms of longevity and anti-aging?
So I mean, this is one that we've also talked about in terms of a lot of this a lot of methods that are supposed to prolong your life, like calorie restriction, actually impact your thyroid and actually make it more sluggish. So but I would say that your thyroid function plays a big role in your body temperature, your metabolism, your immune function, your ability to get rid of toxins. So they want to have an optimized thyroid in order for all of this to work synergistically.
And so if your thyroid function is low, your TSH tends, not always, to be high. And I know Dr. Ray Pete was of the opinion that TSH is in itself toxic. So that's one of the problems of having high TSH, is not just that it indicates a problem, but that it is in itself not good. Like it's it's inherently inflammatory. Do you agree with that? Do you have an opinion on that?
To be honest, I don't know too much about like TSH being inflammatory of itself, but I have to say, just a caveat to that is I do see a lot of people with very low TSH, very low T3 and T4, and sometimes people forget that it can be a secondary hypothyroidism, and actually the problem is higher up in the pituitary and the adrenals. So I wouldn't say like high TSH is bad, but I wouldn't then go and say, okay, then the low TSH is great. So you have to just be quite nuanced working within that range. And I also think that TSH isn't a great marker, but it happens to be in the thyroid panels. I'm actually just really more concerned about the thyroid hormone level, particularly T3.
T3, okay. And so you really want that to be at the top end of the range. You want that to be higher for longevity. That's just want to clarify. Is that the case?
Yeah, I mean, I want to be higher for longevity. There's a little bit of a debate that that T3, alongside even certain medications that are supposed to promote longevity, like rapamycin, can actually affect your stem cell division. And so, but that isn't supposed to actually lead to you having worse longevity. But it's again that concept of do you want to be in this kind of hibernating state that calorie restricted hibernating.
Yeah, like a hibernating state or like a high energy state, right? That's I guess that's was that proverb? Would you rather live a day as a lion or a year as a sheep, kind of thing? It's like but I'm not sure that being in a high energy state does reduce your lifespan, but even if it does, it's like, I'd rather have 80 intense, wonderful years than 100 slow, crappy years. So there's that argument to be made, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of this is still kind of being debated, to be fair, where but I agree that you can't underestimate all of these things that are being thrown at your cells, toxins, like blood sugar, bacteria. If you don't have a good functioning thyroid, you're really going to struggle to defend yourself. So, I think that will ultimately help your longevity.
That makes sense, because the importance for the immune system, which everyone agrees is important for longevity. Yeah. Okay. And what's next?
So I like to look also at albumin levels.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that, because I rarely bother paying attention to that. So tell me why that's important.
For me, it's it's a marker essentially of how of your nutritional status and muscle mass, and I think that, again, it's something that I know the opposite, like low albumin is a sign of systemic inflammation and actually worse mortality. It used to be something we would look at in the hospital, that like elderly people who were admitted in the elderly care ward, if they had low albumin, that was always a very bad sign. And I guess also you could correlate it that if you have low albumin, that means declines in kidney and liver function, and so that's what we don't really want with good longevity and good health span.
Very important. All right, I'll start paying more attention to it. And is it a case of the higher the better, or do we want it mid-range? What are we kind of aiming for longevity?
Yeah, I would say just not low. I mean, high albumin, I don't think it's we don't I can't actually ever remember seeing high albumin. I don't really think it's the cause that you'd have to have a very excess high protein diet or be extremely dehydrated to have very high albumin. So it's not very common, but the low generally tends to mean that that the liver isn't producing enough, and that you're having a lot of just albumin loss through GI issues, kidney disease.
I'm laughing because there's been a few times in our conversations and in these interviews where you said, I've never seen this before. And then I look at my results and I have it. Not necessarily always good, but just so my albumin.
Is your albumin high?
It's at the top of the reference range. It's not outside the reference range.
I think that's good, though. Yeah, that's
okay.
good. Like, and probably so reflecting that you actually are eating enough protein, good quality protein. You're controlling inflammation, supporting your liver, and not trying to introduce too many toxins. So it would make sense in your case.
Excellent. Actually, it's higher in this latest test than it's ever been. So, okay, good news. More good news. I didn't know about that one. Awesome. Okay. What's next?
I think, did we ever get to GGT?
No.
No. So I really like looking at GGT because, again, we talked so much about toxins, and if GGT is raised, then we know that the liver is not very happy and could be aging, and so that's a good sign to make us think about kind of lifestyle factors that could be influencing liver health.
Okay, and you gave a detailed description of that last time in the blood markers one, but just tell us from a longevity point of view, kind of where do we want it? Do we want it as low as possible, or?
Yeah, ideally we want it, I would say, as low as possible. I can't remember ever being worried about a low GGT, but it's one that I find very interesting because in medical school we basically would only talk about GGT and alcohol, GGT and certain medications, and then obviously like liver disease, so things like fatty liver, bile duct obstruction. We wouldn't really talk. I don't think that connection between GGT and like heavy metals, GGT and environmental pollutants and also even like GGT and obesity and metabolic syndrome, that I never learned about in medical school, but I'm seeing it as a very useful marker just to kind of show that that's a problem with somebody.
Excellent. I know there's a few liver markers, but we're trying to be concise here. So that's like the top one you'd recommend for longevity. Awesome. What's next?
I guess cystatin C, I like to check for because I think the kidneys are an often forgotten organ that is actually, again, very important in toxin removal, detoxification. And I'm just seeing an epidemic of impaired kidney function in younger people. And so it's not really boding well for their longevity. And I think people are kind of forgetting about it. So cystatin C is basically a good marker if to kind of get early, to get just as a marker to show for early aging in the kidney or early kidney dysfunction.
Okay. A little tangent maybe, but what do you see that kidney dysfunction in younger people being down to? Do you know?
I mean, the theory is excess protein consumption, which I think, may be playing a role, but I would have to say that I think it's probably more toxin derived, and that could mean it could be toxic protein. So people are eating too much of the wrong type of protein or one that's not a clean source. That could be one. That's kind of the top one that comes to mind.
Toxins make sense to me. Yeah, I was just wondering if there's something specific. Okay, great. And cystatin C better than creatinine. We discussed that a lot again in the recent episode as to why that is. So we won't go through all of that again. So what next?
I think I would really want to just get a good hormone profile to see what one's DHEA level is. I think, starting with DHEAs, we've talked a lot about that, and that's kind of sort of seen as the longevity hormone.
So what does DHEA actually do? Give us a crash course. I don't think we've talked about this, or if we do, I don't remember.
So, in a nutshell, DHEA is a precursor hormone, but I often think about it as the hormone that kind of opposes cortisol. So, you kind of want a good level of DHEA to get your body down from that high adrenaline, high cortisol response. By helping your body sort of get out of that response, DHEA is known to have immunomodulatory effects, and it can enhance the immune system function and help the body basically respond to stress and illness more effectively.
I know Georgy Dinkov, who one of Ray Peat's main promoters to this day. I've seen him talk about how the ratio of cortisol to DHEA. I know you said you don't like to look at ratios, but he talks about how the ratio is a very good predictor of longevity. Meaning the higher your DHEA to cortisol, generally the better off you are. So that's interesting. And as you said, I think just generally in even mainstream medicine, it's understood that DHEA is kind of like a youthfulness hormone, right? And that it just goes down with age, right?
Exactly. So actually quite like your sex hormones, which I think is also an important thing to test. We know that women are thought to have better longevity until menopause, and then they rapidly catch up, and we think that is because of the loss of estrogen and progesterone.
So estrogen. So I know some people, again, more our Ray Peat follower viewers and listeners have this idea that estrogen is pretty much almost entirely negative, except for maybe in the context of its essential role in fertility. But are you saying that estrogen is an anti-aging hormone then, from your perspective?
Yeah, no, definitely. So we know that estrogen has protective effects on the heart, on the bones, that it actually can help with cholesterol ratios by promoting HDL production and lowering LDL. Bones, I think, is actually another thing worth mentioning, because I think people don't really think about the bones too much. But I would say that, tying in a bit of like conventional medicine here, but one of the sort of biggest predictors of mortality in an older person would be a hip fracture, and not previous stroke, not that they have current cancer, but just the fracture. And we sort of forget how important bone health is for overall longevity. And so we know that estrogen helps protect against bone loss.
So what about, like, I read the book Estrogen Dominance a few years ago, and again that was kind of like a theory that estrogen was responsible, or excess estrogen was responsible for a lot of different chronic diseases. Do you disagree with that, or do you just think there's more to it?
I think there's more to it, because to me, estrogen dominance is not just, I mean, it is too much estrogen, and we know that things like obesity and adipose tissue are going to be leading to sort of increased levels of estrogen. But I think also how you metabolize that estrogen is very important. So if you should be able to effectively clear that estrogen, and you do need a good methylation process to do that, and you need certain nutrients that can also really help you detox it down the right pathway. And that's usually where the problem is, not the estrogen itself.
And I will say that for some of the people who, like, biohackers and gym bros I know, who are like messing around with their hormones to quite extreme degrees, they would concur that getting your estrogen down to almost nothing does not feel good. It's not great. You don't want it high, but you really don't want it low either. You want it kind of, as a man, you want it mid-level. So, for women, it's even more important. So I actually agree with you, Dr. Miriam. When there's one person I follow on social media who's like a repeat fan. He's like, estrogen is not a female hormone, it's purely destructive and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, I think you don't quite know what you're talking about in this regard, although, generally I like their work, which is why I follow them. So I think, yeah, estrogen is not, this is like the reaction, right? Because mainstream medicine was like, just give all women estrogen, and then they created all these problems because, they were increasing way too much estrogen in relation to progesterone and maybe other things. But to say that estrogen is purely bad is not accurate either. So I actually agree with you. I was just curious. And so so estrogen and progesterone for women. What about for men?
For men, so I mean, also as you said, estrogen and progesterone are important, but and testosterone, I would say, equally important for men and women, and something that also plays a big role in how you can maintain your muscle mass, and also your things like your grip strength, and factors that also play a role in your longevity. So it's good to have an idea of where you are. And again, all of these approaches need to be personalized, because I agree, like, we shouldn't be giving people blanket hormones, which is unfortunately what is happening. And something like estrogen, if you've been used to having high estrogen your whole life and you've always had estrogen dominance, you won't feel great when that level declines. But so you kind of need to know how your estrogen is metabolized. But then women will feel great with higher levels of estrogen, but it might actually be causing some of the same issues that it caused earlier in life. So we have to be very mindful of that too.
Okay, so what's next?
So I also like to look at other inflammatory markers, such as ESR, which is more a marker of blood inflammation.
Okay, that's inflammation in the blood specifically, ESR.
Yes,
Got
and that's exactly a marker of how your blood cells sort of clump together, so yes, exactly, a blood inflammation marker.
So that's more of a cardiovascular, especially specific marker then?
Not only cardiovascular. There are certain autoimmune conditions where you can have a high ESR, things like giant cell arteritis, and I would say also mean platelet volume is also on that list, and that one is, I would say, a bit more generic, but we know that platelets, like, basically, if platelets sort of become larger and clump together, that increases the mean platelet volume, and that's also supposed to be a marker of inflammation.
Yeah, mean platelet volume. I think when you saw mine, you said it was the lowest result you'd ever seen, which was nice, because you said the lower the better, right? And when you
Exactly.
say and when you say generic, you don't mean like cheap or something. You mean it's the most broad, like it's talking about general inflammation rather than specific inflammation. Is that right?
Exactly, because as opposed to ES, well, I guess ESR is also not generic, but MPV can be high in with many cardiovascular diseases, metabolic, neurodegenerative. It's just more broad spectrum, I guess is the better term.
I'm thinking of another type of inflammation which you've talked about before is lipid peroxides. Is that in this list?
Oh, yes. I mean, to be honest, I lipid peroxides and that is a marker I check for in the urine, not the blood. So like 8-OHDG. But yes, that is a good marker of oxidation. So I do like to check that, but that's not on a blood test.
Oh, that's more oxidation. So tell us a little bit more about that one.
About the 8-OHDG. So essentially, it in a nutshell, it's basically a marker of DNA, of oxidative damage to DNA. So then the DNA itself, is kind of broken apart, and then you get fragments of that. That's the 8-OHDG. So by measuring that, you're actually seeing how damaged is the DNA. So the higher means more DNA damage.
So that goes back to the very first one of the list that you gave earlier of DNA damage and replication. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. And is there anything else on the testing list?
Yeah, I know we want leptin is another one, which is actually quite a big one. And just to kind of explain, so yeah, leptin is a hormone produced by your fat cells, and it plays a big role in your satiety, energy balance, and how satiated you are. And we know that 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 sort of satiety regulation is kind of crucial for maintaining balanced energy metabolism. And you want your body to be sensitive to leptin, and that's kind of a sign that you are metabolically healthy.
Yes. Okay. I've been recently reading Dr. Chuck Cruise's book. I think it's called Epipaleo RX, and he believes that leptin resistance is like the root cause of all the other imbalances. That it's at the root of it. So if you're interested in learning more about leptin, I would say he's a good potential source who goes into it in great depth. Right. Well, that's fantastic. So that's a really good start, and we're going to look at the advanced test results in a minute. But just before we get into that, for anyone watching this, like, oh my God, that seems like a lot. It's a little bit complicated. How do I do this? Where would you recommend? Where can someone get this kind of testing done, Dr. Miriam?
So, I would say most of these markers are available in in even a kind of a standard lab, but there are, I'd say any sort of longevity clinic should really have a basic blood panel. That's what we do. In our clinic, we have kind of have all of these as sort of like a baseline marker, and so it would be kind of included in just like your basic standard report. And ideally, I would imagine that those would be kind of the markers that any kind of longevity doctor would be looking to do.
Excellent. Okay. And, in the next episodes, we will go through, like a general longevity optimization plan with Dr. Miriam, like some generic advice, as it were. But I wanted to start with this one specifically because, it just goes to show there is a generic longevity strategy, but you can see with these examples, just what we just talked about, if you had, most of your test results are okay, but not homocysteine and fasting insulin and, I don't know, GGT, for instance, you might have a very different longevity protocol than if all of your test results are good except for cystatin C and MPV and ESR, right? Like, there's no such thing as only one longevity protocol. The most important thing, because let's face it, as you probably know, if you're the kind of person who watches this episode, there's so much advice out there. There's so many things you could be doing. There's so many things you could be doing just for your longevity. There's also all kinds of conflicting advice. And a lot of people are like, oh, who should I listen to? This one sounds more convincing. This one has better credentials, whatever ways we try and judge. But rather than doing it that way, I would recommend, stop just trying stuff, stop trying to guess who's right and who's wrong and who to listen to, and actually get some testing done and find out, for a fact what's going on, what are the biggest things that are probably, causing accelerated aging or reducing your chances of longevity, and address those, because as I love to say, you're only as strong as the weakest link in the chain. So that's the great thing about this formula that Dr. Miriam's talking about, testing all these things. And I think she's being a bit modest. I think some longevity clinics are going to be testing this kind of stuff, but I think a lot of them miss some of this. So I definitely recommend, especially if you're based in the UK. And I think, where else do you practice, Dr. Miriam? Like where can people be in order to do this with you?
I mean, to be honest, it could be anywhere. I would say in the UK, we have a kind of a nice panel that includes all of this and a lot more. So it's easily accessible through, like we kind of partner with a laboratory that you can pretty much just walk in and get the test done. But I think, people who are in other countries, these are, I wouldn't say, as opposed to the TruAge test, which we're going to discuss, or some of these more fancy longevity tests, these are markers that you should be able to get at labs like Quest, and ones that are more popular in the US, and then in Europe shouldn't be a problem either, or in Australia. It's just about, we just would have to individually select the markers, right? We could just give a list to you.
Awesome. Okay, fantastic. And so for people who want to find out more about working with you, and again, this is not the end of the episode. We're going to go through some other tests, but I just thought let's bring this up now while we've, everyone's thinking about these tests. Because I don't know about you. Listen, when I listen to stuff like this, and I do listen to it a lot, I hear about all this stuff. I'm like, oh, I want to do that. So I just want to give people the opportunity to jump straight into that if they feel that way.
No, certainly. And I think it can't be underestimated, because there is a lot of debate in the longevity community about the accuracy of some of the more fancy tests, but the ones that we've kind of been using in conventional medicine, what I like is that basically the community has, we've looked at more functional ranges and what actually you need to have kind of optimal organ health or optimal inflammation. So I think it's a better tested model to start with something like that. As well as, looking at things like your genetics, because that also plays a role as to what strategies would work better for you.
Absolutely. And, maybe half of those things you were talking about earlier were, at least half of them were related to genetics, right? So I agree that genetics is always a great place to start. So where do they go, Dr. Miriam, if they want to find out more about doing it with you?
They can go actually to our either our website, which is just healthmiro.com.
In an ideal world, you'd meet all of your nutritional needs in the form of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, and more from the foods you eat. However, unless you prepare all of your food at home from scratch using the highest quality ingredients possible, the reality is that most of us need some nutritional support. Most of us need to take supplements if we want to look, feel, and perform at our best on a consistent daily basis. And this is especially true if you have genes that give you an elevated need of certain nutrients. And this is where Feel Younger can help. What I love about Feel Younger is that they offer a huge range of quality supplements and healthcare products formulated and endorsed by Owen Robinson, including must-haves like magnesium glycinate and vitamins B12, D3, and K2. And they do it at affordable prices with free shipping for orders over $50 without ever compromising on quality, purity, or potency. To learn more about how Feel Younger supplements can give your health a boost while supporting this podcast, please visit feelyounger.net and use promo code Rejuvenate to get 20% off your first order. That's promo code Rejuvenate for 20% off your first order at feelyounger.net.
So healthmiro, MIRO.com, is that right?
Exactly, yes. Healthmiro.com, and we're also on Instagram at healthmiro.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so you talked about those fancier tests. Let's finish with that then. So we're actually going to go through and not just talk about them, but give you an example by looking at my results. With this other stuff, we're assuming probably if you're in this community, you've probably seen, thyroid test results and stuff like that before. We don't have to show you that, or testosterone or whatever. But let's talk about the fancier tests then, Dr. Miriam, and then show people. So there are obviously companies out there that claim that they can predict your longevity more precisely than the markers we talked about. So can you speak a little bit about, what they're claiming to do and what you think of it?
Yeah, so I think broadly there's there isn't really one best marker. I think we have to look at a composite, but the longevity tests we see are more looking at your biological age testing, trying to actually, which often tend to be based on DNA methylation patterns. And there you typically actually get an age that, you then want to compare to your actual chronological age and see how you're doing. And that actually is supposed to be a fairly accurate marker. Then we talked about
Sorry, can you explain the concept biological age if we go to the next thing?
Sure. So biological age basically means how old your body seems based on your factors like how your cells are functioning, your DNA, and at the moment we just have a database of people who have done this test, and so you're being really also compared against people that are your age.
So it's like if you sent them your blood and you said, guess my age, without telling them this is what they guess based on looking at it.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. I don't know, it's not a guess, but that's, basically these companies can tell how old you are just by looking at your blood, which is interesting. So and by looking at the DNA within your blood specifically. I think it's within the white blood cells, right? Mainly that they look. Although maybe it's more than that, but anyway. So that's okay. So biological age. So obviously, if I'm 40 and I send them off and I get told my biological age is 20, I'm going to be really happy because it means I look a lot younger than I am. And ditto, if I send my blood off, my DNA off, and I get told I'm 60, I'm going to be very unhappy because it looks like I'm a lot older than I am. That's it in a nutshell, right?
Yeah. Exactly. And I think, that they give a number, but it's white blood cells, but also tends to be more things like your epigenetics as well, and your the DNA methylation pattern. So they'll also look at, for example, how they'll look at how the DNA gets methylated as you get older, and from that is more a marker of what your DNA has been through. So then they kind of they sort of match that with a cohort of people your age to kind of give you a comparison of how
yes
well
well
you're doing.
when I say white blood cells, I didn't mean they're just checking white blood cells. I meant that they're checking the DNA methylation status of your white blood cells as opposed to your red blood cells or something else like that. Yeah, so that's what I meant. But actually, you know what? So I first did this test December 2021. I think the company hadn't even been around very long. And I think I did it again January 2023. So it's a while ago I did both of these. And honestly, with exactly the same bloods, they've given me very different reports depending on what I've checked, like when I first got it and now, like it's very, very different. I think the scores they've given me are different. The way that they present the information is completely different. So I actually hadn't looked at this for a while and for at least a year. And Dr. Miriam had said that she'd also got her results for the first time recently in the last few months. And I said, oh, let me have a look. And I logged in and I don't recognize any of this. All of this is completely different from when I did it. So Dr. Miriam said she had a bit more of a grasp of it. And I said, well, rather than just showing me, why don't we go through it in the episode? I don't know if this makes me look good or not. Probably not great. But, as I said, I think this is done once 3 years ago and once 2 years ago. I'm certainly feeling a lot better since then. Even the last year, I've been doing a lot better. Certainly, both of these are before I started the podcast. So I was not doing that great during these times. But let's see what it says.
Yeah, and I'd also say, we talked about this, that potentially when you first did the test, there was a smaller cohort they were comparing you to. And
Yeah, because I
that
think to
kind of,
begin with, they said my biological age was quite a lot lower than my age, but then like I guess they changed their mind, and I think now it's whatever. It's not very different from my actual age. So as you said, I think as the cohort increased, they decided to downgrade me.
yeah. I also think, I mean, I remember, when I first got into this work in testing, it was when I was pretty young, like when I was still in medical school. So I remember when I was like when I was like age 21, I got my carotid intimal medial thickness measured. And then, they gave me a reported age of like 39, and I was horrified. But then I kind of thought, well, are they really checking that many people in their early 20s? Like, is it actually are they going to be able to, will they have enough data to actually then say, oh, your level is like the level of a 20-year-old? So I think you have to take these with a bit of a grain of salt and not have it, not have it just like completely take over your life. Because to be honest, everyone I speak to about the TruAge, mainly practitioners, because we all talk about each other's tests, hardly anybody's had an age that was their age. They always are older on the first
Oh,
one.
really?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's not the case for me, so maybe I'm doing better than most. Then I guess we'll see.
And I think, if I start scrolling actually on yours, then, so ohmic age 40, chronological age 42. So you actually, well done. Your age is less than your chronological age.
Not by much, but yeah, it showed even a couple of years ago or 3 years ago. I'm not sure which one this is. When I wasn't doing as well, it was still a bit younger, so that is good. That's something. I think honestly, that's in my DNA, like in my genetic insights reports. I'm pretty sure it said that my biological age, like you would expect it to look younger. So maybe to some degree, I don't deserve credit for that, and that's just in my like genetics I was born with, ironically.
Yeah. And so, I have to say, like, I'm not sure actually about the projected age. I, of course, like to look a little bit deeper into the other bits of this test, because I think, I think what's really interesting about the way they do this test is they do take some real-time markers like your morning cortisol, your methylated HSCRP, and then correlate it with your epigenetics and your DNA methylation markers. So I sometimes think that the actual calculated age may not be the most accurate, but then the other markers that they use to figure this out could be, and maybe just as a composite don't work so well.
Oh, you can see, yeah, there's the previous one I did. So yeah, like I said, I did one in December 2021, and then I was slightly younger, and then I did it again in 2023, beginning of 23, and again just slightly younger. So I guess that's not bad, as you said. And what about pace of aging? That's one of the other reports I remember. Is that in here?
Yeah, I'll maybe skip to that one, because I would say that I do find this system actually quite useful, where they're
Oh,
giving
well,
the
let's do that
individual
first
ages.
then. Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry. You do it in the order you want, yeah.
Oh no, I just I think it's quite interesting where they're looking at markers for the organ systems. I'd say yours look pretty good, but interestingly, you'll often find an outlier you weren't expecting. So I think in your case, brain and blood, are quite a lot significantly older than the others.
Well, that's not a surprise with the leads in the bloods and probably the brain. And I guess,
Kidneys,
yeah, that would affect the
yeah.
kidneys. Although you'd think that would affect the liver as well. So I guess that doesn't quite make sense. The immune system's the worst one though, right?
Yeah, and so I mean, I see this pattern a lot. I would say that I think this marker could be driven by things like your your insulin, your stress response. So, and then if you've had a recent infection, so because I often see the immune age quite high, and it's in somebody who doesn't have an obvious immunodeficiency, or it doesn't sort of correlate with the history. But it could
I
also mean,
think
yeah.
but at that time I was having chronic infections, so that 100% makes sense then. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and as you said, I mean, you make a good point about heavy metals, which I think people don't quite realize that is going to affect inflammation in the blood. I often think about like circulation and things like clots. I'm like, okay, if somebody's blood age is high, does that mean that circulation is not working very well? Yes, I quite like this because I think again people tend to fixate on maybe a one organ system, and then they go to a practitioner with that one organ system, and then the practitioner also can be like, okay, sometimes just seeing another organism show up as aging faster can really change your overall strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, and this was, especially the 2021, that is when I was pretty sick. So I'm not surprised some of these aren't optimal, definitely. I like brain, my brain has generally been quite an asset through most of my life. But I remember this period between 20 and 2022, especially, it was not. Like I had a lot of brain fog. I had a lot of mental health disturbance. I had anxiety, all kinds of stuff that I've talked about already. So I won't go into it again. But yeah, again, I'm not surprised to see it being far from optimal.
No, but I think it's it you can then see that actually you can find a defining factor that links them. So, for example, heavy metals in your case would affect many of these systems, and so I think it's a little bit like chicken and egg. Like you're thinking of, okay, what is this toxin doing to my organs? But then how can I optimize the organ? And again, I just go back to the kidneys because I think it's a kind of underestimated organ when it comes to your longevity. So often it'll be seen as an outlier, and people are like, well, my kidney function has always been fine on the bloods, but it's very much affected by your toxin exposure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then this, I'd say the Dunedin pace of aging, pace score. I really like this, and it's it is showing that for every chronological year that passes, you're aging by how much. So like you would be aging by 0.7 years, so which is good, meaning you're aging slower.
Okay, so despite, and I think I've seen that before in other people's. I think when we discussed this, you said you'd seen it a lot, right? Where people, maybe like with me, they are kind of just about their age, or even sometimes with people, they're older, but their biological age is older than their chronological age, but their pace of aging is still low. And so my way of looking at that is like, probably in the past they really prematurely aged themselves. Like I know I did. I was taking drugs, I was smoking all day, I was doing lots of things to not look after myself for many years, right? And then by the time you're the kind of person who would do this kind of test, you've probably spent a while doing the opposite, right? Like trying to sort yourself out. So then I guess it could make sense, right? That on one hand, your biological age score would be higher, but on the other hand, your pace of aging score would be lower, because you really messed yourself up in the past and now you're kind of making up for it. Does that make sense, or do you disagree?
No, I completely agree, and I think in a way, I think this is a more optimistic score because I agree. Like I think people who check this often are then interested in their health and have been doing things to promote health. So in a way, it's reflected that okay, you've slowed it down, but often that's come after a period of abusing their health, or even things like in my case, when I was in my early 20s, I had to work a lot of night shifts and had to do things that weren't great for my circadian rhythms and for my aging. But now it's it looks like I've kind of reversed some of that, or at least I'm aging slower. So I think more optimistic than some of the other markers that I saw.
And so you see that generally with people, right? And it makes sense. As I say, by the time someone's willing to spend a few $100s on this, they probably put a bunch of effort in their health already. Do you ever see someone who's really health obsessed who doesn't have a good pace of aging score, like where it's still quite bad?
Yes, I'd say actually some of my patients who I would say do quite a lot of exercise, maybe I would say a little bit too much. I've seen that actually where I've seen that score even kind of go up to 2 almost.
Oh, wow. It goes to show again that thing we talked about earlier of hormesis and maybe it was another time we talked about it, but yeah, like stress, like the right amount of stress is optimal, but too much stress, even if it's stuff that's supposed to be good, I just had someone who was talking to the other day who's a practitioner and very dedicated to their health. I think they're like a little bit younger than me, maybe between my age and your age, Dr. Miriam. And and they were having this problem. I said, "Oh, it looks like something." And they said, "Oh, but every day I do exercise, I do cold plunges, I do red light therapy, I do this." And they just reeled off like this big list of things. And I was like, oh God, all of that stuff is good, and I've probably recommended most of it on my show one time or another. But it just the amount of different things that you're doing, it just seems like it's and they're all things that are a stress on the body. I guess that's the point, right? Like red light is good, but it's a stress on the body. Like cold is good, but it's a stress on the body. Exercise is good, but it's a stress on the body. And I can't remember, there were a few other things like that. So it's very interesting that you say that exercise is like the number one thing you see that increases that pace of aging. That's fascinating. Is there anything else you've noticed, like people do, like a vegan diet, or is there any other correlations, or a carnivore diet maybe, to not pick on the vegans? Like, is there anything else you've noticed where people do something that is supposed to be good for them, but you see that it maybe is not so good based on what you see here?
I would say not from a dietary perspective. I mean, I have to say, I think going back to kind of overall trends in longevity, I think from a food perspective, there's actually a lot more supporting plant diversity. So and I know that's a little bit controversial, but there was, I think the vegan diet has been picked on a lot, and actually some of the principles, maybe shouldn't have been picked up. I wouldn't say I've seen a big difference in terms of that pace of aging. I would say though, it's a tough one because people, a lot of the people I've seen who do when I say excessive exercise, I mean more like ultra marathoners or people, not somebody who's going, let's say, even moving 7 times a week. I think that's good, but
okay, so it's more really like too many hours a day. So even half an hour to an hour lifting weights a day, that's okay. It's like 3 or 4 hours a day running kind of thing that's doing it.
What's interesting is, I've in a couple of those patients, they've spoke quite openly to me about how, like, let's say triathlons and things actually got them off of an alcohol addiction or a drug addiction. And so you kind of think that probably would have also affected their pace of aging just as much, if not more. So
true.
It's a tough one.
Everything's contextual. Yeah. That's absolutely true. Yeah. So sorry, carry on with this.
Oh, just well, I was just going to scroll down a little bit, but yeah, you can see that, as you get older, your pace of aging is actually decreased according to them.
That's good. And that makes sense. As I admitted, in 2021, I was quite unwell. So it's actually amazed it was as good as it was in 2021. By 2023, I was getting a lot better. So yeah.
And, I would say, I'll just add that they have added a few more things here. So there is, for example, a marker of your stem cell divisions, and then they use that kind of to correlate like a cancer risk.
Where's that?
That's it's not on yours. I want to say that it must be a new thing that was added more recently.
Oh, okay.
But again, they say that, and then there's a lot of disclaimers there about how, okay, just because you have a high number of stem cell divisions does not mean that you have cancer or going to get cancer. So, you kind of, but in a way it does, it does actually, make you think. And I know we spoke about this also in terms of the validity of the test. Like, could things like, apparently, could T3 increase your metabolism, thereby increasing your cell division, and that not correlate to cancer risk? So,
oh yeah, just before we finish, we said we talk about mitochondrial testing as well. So I don't think we had got anything to show you in that regard. We haven't got anything prepared anyway. But that's another kind of testing that I know you've done with me and with a bunch of your clients as well. So can you talk a little bit about mitochondrial testing, like in what context you would do it and how it can be useful?
Yeah, so I used to, when I would talk about mitochondrial testing, I was actually looking more so at things like the organic acid test and the Nutraval, where you would get markers that reflect your your mitochondrial function. But I just would often see those come back as normal in people who were really struggling with fatigue, and it just didn't really make much sense to me. So I then actually found a test that it's through a German company called MMD, but they do a mitochondrial health index test where they're actually manipulating your blood samples to see how your mitochondria are reacting to stress. So you can get markers, you get sort of an overall mitochondrial health index, but you can also look at your cellular oxygen consumption profile, your ATP turnover rate, how your cellular energy is at rest versus on energy demand. Quite a few things that really help you kind of pinpoint where there's an issue. So that's also a test that is actually available worldwide, I believe.
And so, as I said, like most obvious to use it are people like chronic fatigue and stuff because that's obviously mitochondrial dysfunction. But is there a case to be made if someone's enthusiastic and well resourced that that's just a good test to do in general, given how important mitochondria may well be for overall health and longevity? Like, do you use it that way for people who want it, or do you only use it in the case of like, severe fatigue and stuff?
No, I would definitely vouch for doing it, even if you feel like your health is kind of optimal, because I think even seeing, even for example, improving exercise performance or improving mental clarity, like your oxygen consumption rate and just your circulation play such a big role in that. And then also you can get an idea of could you be generating too many free radicals? And for example, like somebody who exercises a lot, you want to make sure that you don't in the process have too many free oxygen radicals. So it can kind of also make sure that you are, there are always things you can improve, but also even like health practices that you can tweak based on these results.
Awesome, interesting. Is there any other kind of advanced test that people may not have heard of that you want to just mention in context of longevity before we finish?
So I would say, the other test that that I'm familiar with is also the glycan age test. It is also a biological age test, but it's measuring the age of your immune system based on glycosylation patterns of one of your immunoglobulins, and so it this process basically influences more your structure and function of your proteins, and so you do actually, as we said, immune health is probably one of the most important components of aging. So it really gives you a more valuable, valuable marker to look at your, comparing your immune system's biological age with your chronological age.
Interesting. Okay. And I think that's how would you compare that to the TruAge in terms of how valuable or useful it is?
I think they're both quite valuable. I think the glycan age is a bit more specific, so we kind of can measure something, and maybe we'd be able to build a plan that's more tailored. I think with the TruAge, there's so many factors. It's fascinating. I think you could spend a whole year building a program around that. I think it's tough to say, but I think they're both good in their own different ways.
Okay, interesting. Well, I'm asking partly from a personal point of view, because one of the things I don't like about the TruAge, honestly, not only is it very expensive, but they add a ridiculously high shipping and customs and all the rest of it, charge on top of it for people outside the US. I think that almost doubles the price. So if the glycolate doesn't do that, then it's certainly a better value for money. One more longevity test. Funnily, actually, literally, I've got it in my calendar. As soon as we finish recording, I'm going to do another longevity test. I was wondering if you heard of it. A deuterium level test. Is that something you've ever tried? or done?
I haven't, but I have met, I have read about sort of deuterium kind of related to the diet, like reducing deuterium burden in the body. But no, I've not heard of actually a test. I just assumed it was, things you would do to lower your level. So that's something I would be very interested in.
Cool. Well, when I get my results, I'll share them with you. And if you're interested in seeing them, then tell me in the comments, and maybe I'll share it with you guys publicly. And so, yeah, something I'm still studying. But again, if you're interested in that, let me know. Put it in the comments, and maybe I'll do an episode on deuterium. Okay, well, Dr. Miriam, before we finish, I know as well as your own clinic, you wanted to mention you're doing a live talk very soon, and then also on a monthly basis in case someone can't make the most imminent one. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I am doing a series of talks with my business partner Elena, and this will be in London. So for any of those people who are based in London or in the UK, it's a free event at the Londoner Hotel in central London. So if possible, maybe I'll put a link to the Eventbrite. But it's free in case anyone's interested. We will be talking about longevity first, which it is to the general public, so it might be a little bit more basic than maybe what we've discussed here, but we will also be talking about strategies and a little bit about testing too. And then it's going to be a monthly event for the next few months where we'll be focusing on hormones, adrenals, skin health, so different topics.
Nice. And is there a Q&A at the end?
And there's a Q&A at the end, yes.
Okay, so that's one other value of going there as opposed to watching this episode. So you can actually ask some questions specific to what you're interested in. Awesome. Okay, so yeah, we'll definitely include the link for that. But I know a lot of people never check show notes based on the comments I see. So again, if they go to healthmiro.com, will there be a link to the event there?
There will be on our Instagram.
Okay, instagram.com/healthmiro, MIRO. Check it out to find out when the next event is. Fantastic. And so we will, at some point, hopefully soonish, do a part 2 on this. That'll be a bit more freewheeling. This was a very specific, going through a lot of different stuff. But in the next one, we'll just give some general advice for longevity and life extension. The reason I wanted to start with this episode the way I've done it is because as I said, I think I've done 2 other podcasts today, and I've said it in every podcast I do. If you watch all my stuff, you'll be sick of hearing me saying it. Like, the future of medicine is personalized medicine. One size fits all advice is nice, but it's so much better to go and see a practitioner like Dr. Miriam, actually test these things. She's just giving examples, maybe do a TruAge test, find out what organ systems to focus on, at least do those basic blood tests, see where your weakest links are, where you have the most room for improvement, where you're also doing well, so you can pat yourself on the back, and also know where not to waste time, right? Like, why spend hundreds of dollars a month on all kinds of anti-inflammatories when you have no markers of inflammation and no signs of inflammation? Like, focus on what actually needs doing rather than putting all your time and effort and money into things that maybe don't even need doing. So super important to find out where you're doing well and where you're not doing well. So definitely would recommend, and Dr. Miriam is my personal doctor, so you can't get higher recommendation than that, to go to healthmiro.com. And I look forward to doing a part 2, Dr. Miriam, where we give some, despite what I say about generic health advice, I also know what is true as a practitioner is that maybe 50% of what you tell every patient is roughly the same thing. So we can cover all of that stuff in the next episode. All the stuff that does apply to the majority of people is still good advice. And so we'll do that from a longevity perspective next time. So thank you, Dr. Miriam. Is there anything you want to add before we end?
No, just to kind of echo, I think a lot of the longevity focus is very much research oriented. So if at any point kind of lost about what causes it, I think what's interesting is if you look at it from a personalized journey, it's really interesting how you can apply those things to, to even, things in your childhood to then the aging. So it just becomes much more fascinating when it's personalized. And then I think the interventions then also will make more of an impact. And as you said, this, like the TruAge test hasn't been around for that long. So I think as a practitioner, it's quite fascinating to interpret it. But I think, so definitely would love to help other people do that.
Excellent. Yeah, I just want to echo that and say, just to expand on it, to say, I know it seems like spending money on testing or spending money on time with a practitioner, it seems like a lot, and isn't it? It seems like a lot compared to just buying the latest supplement or superfood or whatever. But I can tell you from experience, not just myself, but talking to so many people, that when you're fumbling around just trying stuff based on, I heard about it on a podcast, I heard about it in an article, I heard about it in a book, the amount of money you can waste, the amount of time you can waste, the amount of actually damage you can do to yourself. I'll speak for myself, of like doing the wrong thing, which leads you into diametrically the opposite direction of where you're supposed to go, is considerable. So actually, that investment in testing and getting a specialist, an expert to help you interpret those tests and help you interpret your symptoms is an extremely worthwhile investment, rather than the endless dabbling and trying different things that I see most, and that I myself did as well for years. It's I understand the temptation. If you're the kind of person who watches the health podcast, you're probably also the kind of person who is more of a free thinker and not just going along with the crowd, and maybe you don't want you want to work things out for yourself and all that kind of stuff. And I do understand and appreciate that. But there's nothing wrong with asking for help. I guess that's the point. Ultimately, you are still in charge of your own health. You are still in charge of your own life and your own destiny and your own everything. But getting some help from some specialists, some experts, is always a smart thing to do. And Dr. Miriam, especially as I say, if you're in the UK, definitely, or in Europe, is a bit of a obvious step to take.
Yeah, very much appreciated. But I agree with your points. And I think also, just to one kind of final thought, is just that, the way that kind of interventions are spoken about to practitioners versus to the consumers, I think, practitioners are actually likely to get a bit of a maybe more in-depth understanding of why something might work for that person. But just to and I think also it's just good to have some guidance.
Basically, yeah. Even if you think you're already an expert, like getting another expert on board is always helpful. Okay, so thank you very much for watching or listening. Remember, if you're on YouTube or any of those kind of social platforms, Rumble or whatever, to leave a comment, leave a question, subscribe, click the notification bell if you're on YouTube. If you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple or something like that, then remember, I will always answer every question, sooner or later anyway. So go to YouTube to ask any questions. Go to healthmiro.com to learn more about Dr. Miriam, and see you next time. Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed that, I recommend watching our latest episode, which you can do by clicking above, and make sure to subscribe, like the video, comment, and share with anyone who you think might appreciate it. Thank you.